Welcome to the Fast Leader Show, hosted by Jim Rembach, President of Execution Architects and Executive Director of the Leadership Execution Institute. Join in as we go beyond generic management advice and examine the true physics of strategic execution in our post-AI world. Let's explore upgrading the operating system your people run on so they can move onward and upward faster.
Hey, and welcome to the Fast Leader Show. We're going to have a great discussion today because I have Manar Morales on the show with me today, and we're going to talk about something that I think everybody probably can improve and build skills upon. And I would dare to say in the workplace, it's probably one of the most challenging places because we have so many objectives to be able to accomplish that this becomes a difficulty. And so what we're going to talk about is the information that Manar Morales works with on a daily basis and is outlined and given more insight and information on the flexibility or in the flexibility paradigm, which she is the author of. And the subtitle is Humanizing the Workplace for Productivity, Profitability, and Possibility. Manar, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Jim.
Now, before we get into the actual topic about flexibility and the paradigm associated with it, can you, in your own words, give us a little bit of insight on how you're making a difference in the lives of the people that you work with today?
Yeah, I think the idea around flexibility really is a human issue, right? The idea of having that human-centered workplace. And so for us, it's really helping organizations think through how do they create flexible work environments. That's a win-win. How does it work for employees? How does it work for the employer so that everybody is getting the benefit of it?
So, to me, when you just said that, I start thinking about how the concepts of flexibility has changed with us in the past few years. Even when I would dare to say, talking about the evolution and changes of that, pre-COVID, post-COVID, definitely. And now we have certain things that are happening in regards to people being, as you want to say, called back to work, in certain situations. This whole flexibility thing is now probably more diverse than we look at different generations in the workplace. So help us understand a little bit about what you mean by flexibility.
Yeah, so flexibility has been around for a long time. I think certainly in the book, I go through the history and the evolution of it. And I talk about the idea around holistic flexibility. So it's not one size fits all. There's lots of ways to think about what does it mean to be flexible in where you work, when you work, even how in some ways that you're working. And so it's really around, you could have job sharing, you could have shifting of hours, you could have reduced hours, you could have, everybody is dealing with virtual work and hybrid work situations. And so when we think about flexibility, that's what we're really talking about is the different ways in which an organization can adopt different practices that fits with the job too, right? Not every job can, work in a particular way, but there's always some way that we can structure it with some form of flexibility. What happened during COVID was everybody had a grand experiment with virtual work, right? All of a sudden, organizations had to, for their survival, for a lot of the ones, had to figure out how to go completely virtual when they never had any experience with it. And so that is what shifted. I think that the idea around all of a sudden, organizations that would have never tried it, individuals who would have never worked that way, suddenly had to figure out how to make it work. And that shifted the conversation. So while flexibility has been around for a while, what happened during COVID was everybody had to work for it, whether they wanted to or not.
So I want to get into, because I find this and run into this quite a bit when people start talking about leading of people and developing people, coaching people. It's a very different, talking about paradigm, when you start looking at people who are in-house. I can actually walk over to or have somebody come to me versus being remote. How has that, and what do we need to do differently because of that?
I think it depends on the kind of office that you're in, right? So I would say it goes to what the culture of the office is, but certainly, let's say you have the ways in which we have to connect. Technology has done great things for us. And I think part of it is, sure, can I walk over and talk to somebody? Or am I thinking about what are the kinds of things I can be doing when somebody is working virtually versus the kinds of things when they're working in the office? Let's say you have a single office environment, right? A lot of the organizations we're working with have multiple office locations. And so this idea around being able to work in that fashion, I always say, even for those offices that if everybody came back in the office 5 days a week, you're still hybrid by nature because they're working. But let's say the example of people who are working in a single office location, the thing around it is you're thinking about what are the kinds of things that you're doing when you're in person and what's the return on experience when you're in the office, and thinking about what are those things and thinking about the return on experience of when you're working from home, what are those kinds of things, and being really deliberate. One of the things I say is that for flexibility to work, you have to be intentional. It works by design, not by default. So really taking a look as teams, for example, to say, what are the things that we are needing to be doing in person? What are the things that we can be doing virtually? How can we connect? One-on-one meetings. A lot of times people are in even large offices and they'll say, I'm on a Teams call or a Zoom call with somebody that's 3 floors down from me. Like this idea that every time we're in an office, everybody is gathering in person. A lot of times people are, calling meetings and everybody is in their office, even though it's in one building. So really being intentional with looking at what the nature of the work is, and then let's design for the nature of the work.
Well, I think that also leads us to come face to face with a lot of the misconceptions and misunderstandings. So, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about workplace flexibility?
Yeah, I think one of the big one is that it's not a trade-off for performance. So a lot of things that we're hearing about is this idea where people are doing a return to office, that they're saying people aren't performing. That's why we're doing it. And I say, really, flexibility is not a trade-off for performance. So if somebody is not performing, that's not a flexibility issue, right? That's a performance issue that should be handled by HR. Flexibility is a responsibility is another one of the things that I talk about, right? This idea that it's not something that is a free for all. I think a lot of people think, oh, it just means that I allow people to do whatever it is they want. That's not true. We have flexibility with guardrails. So flexibility is a responsibility on the part of the organization. You have to think about what are the practices we need in place, what's the policy, what's the infrastructure, how can we support whatever kind of flexibility we allow. On leaders to be thinking about how do I lead in whatever environment I have. So if, for example, I have a hybrid environment, how do I lead in that environment? The example that you gave versus the idea of, okay, if I'm not just how do I connect with people in this environment? How do I think about feedback? How do I think about all of those things that I want to be doing, not just when we're in the office? I think one of the misconceptions is, oh, well, we connect when we're together. And I say, if you have a hybrid situation, you need to be connecting 100% of the time. You need to be thinking about how we connect. The one other there's so many, but one of the other ones I think that's important to talk about is the idea that it's presenteeism over purpose, right? That the idea that that FaceTime is some sort of indicator of success. And I think FaceTime is not an indicator of success. It's really what is it that people do, if we're just talking about hybrid, for example, when they are in the office that you want them to be doing. In other words, you're creating some return on experience and you're training people to understand that here's the kind of behaviors, here's the types of activities that we think are really good. This is what the value of being in the office is, and what's the value you get when you're working from home. But the idea that I think around FaceTime is some sort of indicator of commitment. I would say you don't know what it is people are doing when they're in your offices, right? We think we have this false sense of, oh, I see them, they must be working. And the reality is, right, we judge based upon output and impact. Not just, am I getting my work done, but what are the ways you're also contributing to the things that are necessary in an organization to be successful? And that's really the way that we know. Everybody has a computer in front of them. That's a highway for them to be doing whatever it is that they want to be doing. And so I think focusing on a couple of those is important.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for me, when I was, I guess going into the workplace and being in something that was, beyond just like a retail type setting where you had, hours and stuff. The advice given to me was make sure you arrive before your boss and leave after.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That appearance that I'm really committed. It wasn't about what you were doing before your boss arrived or after they left. It was this idea of, if I just give the appearance of that appearance of that I'm a hard worker, that somehow that will prevail.
That's right. Okay. So when you start talking about, the differences and the approaches and all of that, I mean, what are some of the measurable benefits of workplace flexibility that you've seen for a business?
Yeah, I think in terms of where I recruit. So how do I suddenly, if I'm in one market, suddenly the talent pools of other markets are available to me. And certainly if you allow some form of 100% virtual, in terms of what are the kinds of benefits I can offer people outside of even compensation, right? That these are things that, how can I we're seeing in this country burnout as an all-time high. What are the things that I can help to alleviate in some ways, to give people some sort of control, some sort of autonomy. So that certainly is. From a retention aspect, right, we were seeing that, in terms of, this is something that makes me more of an employer of choice, and then people will stay. There's research showing around the benefits when it comes to retention too, and also the benefits when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, in terms of who benefits around the ideas of the forms of flexibility. I say, in order for flexibility to work, you do have to degender, deparent, and destigmatize it. But it still does have a huge impact on your ability to attract and retain and advance women in organizations. And so there is a gender component to it as well, but certainly with that caveat that it's not something that's just for women. It's really something for everybody. And then generationally, it looks at, in terms of what are the things that younger generations are wanting in the workplace. Flexibility certainly is ranked high up there.
Well, and I think that's a really interesting element to look at, is the different generations that are in the workforce. I mean, what do we have?
Yeah.
6 now?
Five.
Five, and I think
5. Yeah.
Depends on if the old ones are still keep coming back, because that is happening. Yeah. So it's when I look at 5 generations, when I look at some that were grown up and groomed like me, get there before the boss, leave after the boss. And when you start talking about that, culturally, does it create a lot of problems for organizations when they have, that 5 generations in the workplace, more so than one that only has, say, 1 or 2 generations in the workplace? Or is it, again, just a different perspective thing?
I think it's a different perspective. So I think one of the things I say is, one of the core principles around flexibility is we have to adopt this yes and mindset to it. It's not about a debate of, do I work better in the office? Do I work better from home? Which do I prefer? It's really around, for organizations to say, we want to value the different styles of working that people have and what people need, along with it's winning for us as a business, right? That idea that it's not a trade-off for performance is a really important one. But I think it's around, I think when you have multiple generations, people have it and need it for different needs. And honestly, I will say, post what happened during COVID was people who would have never said I would have worked this way, right? Because I never thought I needed it, suddenly saw the benefits and the value of it, and said, I'm not sure I want to go back to the way I saw that, what I was able to do while I was doing that. So sometimes you can't actually make assumptions generationally. I will say, we're certainly working with organizations, let's say law firms, that will say, we want our associates back in the office. And they're saying, it's not the problem with the associates coming back in the office. We're having problems with the partners coming back in the office, with the senior leaders who've decided, this worked for me. And so there's a balance. Not certainly every law firm is experiencing that, but there is around leaders who will say, I'm doing what I need to do and can get it done. I don't see it. So I think culturally, when we talk about, I do a lot of work in the book of explaining this idea that flexibility is not a policy shift. It is a whole culture change. So we have to be talking about, what is our culture? What do we value? It's not around, I would say, it's not around, right, getting to common ground. We don't have to agree around how we prefer to work. What we have to do to get to higher ground around what is in the best interest of the organization and all of the people within it, not just a certain select group, but all of us together.
I think that's a really important point. I mean, you're starting to talk about, like you were saying with guardrails and start setting an expectation. But then also talking about flexibility, sometimes, shifts do happen. And whether it's an acquisition that takes place or whether it's a customer need and demand that takes place. And, trying to set the culture up by which, people can collectively be able to serve each other and the customer. And that's not an easy task.
Yeah.
And so when you start talking about also the magnitude and scope of certain organizations, there was a study that stated that anytime you get over 300 people in a company, you start getting diminishing laws of return in regards to productivity per person. And impact, to the business per person. And that's one of the things that supposedly Richard Branson used in all of his Virgin companies and Virgin brands, is trying to keep them small so they could be flexible and then also not experience some of the things that you're talking about. How does that, does that ring true when you start talking about flexibility within an organization as far as magnitude, scale, and scope of the organization?
I think it can work in any size organization. It just doesn't look the same. So I always keep saying it's not one size fits all. It's why we spend so much work and the book around the framework is because I think you have to figure out what works for your organization, what works for your culture. What was happening is I think people have these knee-jerk reactions to be very reactive. What's the market doing? What should our policy look like? And one of the things that is really important is you go way back and say, let's start with purpose. What does flexibility make possible for us as an organization? Whether we're a 10-person organization, whether we're a 1,000-person organization, what does it make possible for us? And I do think that when you have the larger organizations, it is important to say, how are we integrating this throughout the organization? How are we making sure we have expectations of our leaders and our teams? And there might be a little bit more in such larger organizations for teams to also think about, hey, we've given you a structure, we allow this, now figure out how you're going to make it work in your team. And that might look different teams across teams. And so it's highly customized. And it's where I say it doesn't work by default. I think a lot of people make the mistake that, it's flexibility is just a policy. We're just going to drop that in an organization and it's going to work. And I would say it's not going to work. I'll tell you that right now. And it's not going to be the failure of flexibility. It's going to be a failure of implementation.
Well, and I think the biggest variability that we all are going to experience in our life is dealing with other human beings.
Yeah. But our people are at the center. I always ask when I'm working with organizations, are you people first? And let's say they are in a client service business. I say, are you people first? Are you team first? Are you client first or customer first? And I'm always interested in what the answer is there. And I would say, look, if you are people first, your people will take care of your teams will take care of your clients. It's the idea of the adage of the oxygen mask. It's like your people you need to be thinking about your people. And if your people are at the center of your conversations, they will take care of the clients, the customers, whomever it is that you serve.
Okay, so how does flexibility impact employee productivity and job satisfaction?
Yeah, I think it highly impacts job satisfaction, and it can highly impact productivity done right. I always say go back to we have to do it right. But it goes back to that first principle of it is not a trade-off for performance. Right. So if we are seeing with flexibility declines in productivity, one of the last steps in the framework that I talk about in the book is measuring and monitoring. If you did it for the business reason, you should continuously be checking what's happening. And does bad behavior exist? Of course it does. It exists in any organization, right? With anything. But I would say those are performance issues, right? If somebody is not accessible, if somebody is not available, it should not be having an impact on productivity. And in fact, it should be enhancing productivity.
So how can organizations balance flexibility with maintaining a strong workplace culture?
Yeah. And that's around being really intentional around culture. I just was giving a talk around the importance of culture as a talent strategy. And I really think that culture is not a place and work is not a location, right? The idea that culture is something that you infuse throughout your organization. It's about who do you serve, right? I think about your stakeholders. It's about what you value in the organization. It's about where are you going in terms of your future, in terms of your mission. It's about what you stand for and what you hold people accountable for. So there's a whole exercise that we're working with clients through on really defining their culture, because that's the biggest thing I think that people are concerned about with flexibility. And I say flexibility should be a driver and help you throughout with your culture. And is it in alignment with who you say you are and what you say you value in the organization? How do we make sure that flexibility actually enhances that?
So, what challenges arise when shifting from a rigid work structure to a flexible one?
One is, do people know what they're doing, right? Do the people know what their expectations are? Do leaders, for example, one of the challenges when you're suddenly moving to uh, a hybrid schedule, let's say that you're implementing, can be proximity bias on the part of the leaders. You talked about it in the idea around like, is it easier for me to just walk over? Well, if we suddenly create this flexible work environment where we can have some days where people are working from home, and then the challenge can be who's being left out of meetings, who's not getting the assignment, who's not getting the feedback, who are we defaulting to? Are we favoring the people who are in the office? And so really being intentional to talk to leaders about this is what it looks like in a hybrid environment to be a good leader, talking to employees to say, by the way, this is what it looks like. And this is what we mean by flexibility. And this is what we don't mean by flexibility. So there are examples where, let's say, somebody is implementing a hybrid, a virtual environment where there's, a couple of days or whatever, how many ever days they allow people working from home. Some people take that to mean I have time flexibility. Some people will say, "Oh, I have like 3 hours or 4 hours in the middle of the day that I'm doing something else, and then I'm coming back." And I'm like, that is a form of flexibility, but that's not the form of flexibility that your employer happens to be doing. That's time flexibility. Is your employer allowing that? And so I think on the part of employers, sometimes they're not clear to say, no, if you're working from home, it's transparent, it's seamless. You're still working within the hours of the same hours of the day that's required of everybody. And then there's a lot around, I think, have we taught people around, have we done training or given people experiences on what does it mean to connect? How are we going to collaborate? How are we going to communicate? All of the things that are necessary to be effective in those environments. That I think what a lot of employers are missing is that level of intentionality.
As you started hitting on some of those things, I'm like, how do you, the whole proximity bias, just looking at that alone.
Yeah.
We know touch, feel, handshakes, fist pumps, whatever you want. All of those things do make a difference when you start talking about relatability. And when you don't have those with certain employees, I could easily see where if I am not very careful, I would be cutting all those other people out because I'm not high-fiving with, Manar in the break room.
Yeah.
I'm not, we're not going out to lunch together. That's hard because those are real human, and engaging and connecting emotions.
Yeah, so I will say there's a difference when we have people who are 100% virtual versus a hybrid situation. So every situation is going to be different, right? If you're saying, "Oh, well, we allow people to be 100% virtual," so there's a certain group of people that we're actually not engaging with, then we need to be thinking about what are the ways we're connecting with them. The hybrid situation where it's, a couple of days or something, then there are moments where, let's see, I would see you and I'm making the time to make sure that I am connecting with you. I think that the mistake that people think is that, oh, that's the only way that we can connect, right? I say if you look at younger generations, they're connecting digitally before they're connecting in person. Lots of times they're developing relationships digitally. You and I can connect on this in ways that we couldn't before, right? And I think that's leaning into there's different ways we can connect. And then the second part is leaning into who has access to me and who doesn't have access. And I will say those kinds of things actually aren't just about who's working virtually and who's not. I will say it's also about who's in my network and who's not, who on my team has access to me and who doesn't. We can also engage in affinity bias, which is we just surround ourselves with people who look just like us. And if I'm also not intentional about paying attention to who am I fist bumping, who am I asking about their weekend, even if all of us were in an office, right? Who am I asking about their weekend? Who am I not asking about their, who am I taking out to lunch? Who am I not taking out to lunch? And so the idea of us being as leaders aware is good in whatever environment you're in, whether you're in a flexible environment or not.
Yeah, those are these unintentional biases. They're all over the place.
Correct. Right. Yes. Unconscious bias is
Unconscious, real. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So when you start talking about companies, and you said an important thing is a lot of times people think flexibility and the default thinking is we're talking about time flexibility. And that may not be an option for us because of various reasons. But how can companies ensure that they're actually being able to implement a flexible work environment and really address one of the things that you're talking about? Because like you were saying, we're seeing burnout at all-time highs. How do we make sure that we're not misapplying? Because I'll give you a quick example. People were talking about, the whole perks at work thing. And when you look at some organizations, I mean, their perks were like really over the top. Do we need to have, 5 kegs of beer every Friday afternoon? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can just go on and on. How can you make sure that we're actually being more effective at the decisions we're making?
So who's at the table when you're making those decisions is a really important, and whose voices are you listening to? So I think oftentimes leaders can be making these decisions around a executive committee, a management committee, a leadership team, and they're making it amongst themselves. And one of the questions I would say is, who are you designing for? If you're designing, who are you? You're designing for the workforce you have and the workforce that you want to attract into your organization. You're not designing for the workforce that you used to have. So that's one thing to pay attention to first is, who are we centering right now and who are we designing? And then what do they want? So one of the things I go into the book is, are you doing engagement surveys? Are you doing stay interviews? Are you tapping into the voices of your people to say, hey, what really matters to you, right? What are the things that we can be doing? What does flexibility make possible for you as an individual? You're really kind of paying attention to what it is that people want. Sometimes we think we're giving everybody what they want and they don't really want it. And I'm like thinking, how about you actually ask your people what it is they want, what it is that they need, what do they value? And then think about how we as an employer or as a leader, how do we deliver on that so that we're keeping an engaged and happy workplace?
Well, as you're saying that, I mean, I think if you were to ask somebody something that they don't have deep knowledge and understanding into, they're going to give you what they've just been exposed to. So you're going to get the same hashing of stuff over and again. Hey, it's what I saw on my feed. It's what my friend, says they're doing at their place. And so I think, to me, I would think the process by talking about doing what you're doing, I think there's an influence and a persuasion opportunity to it.
Yeah.
An education opportunity to it. And I think, and you may have gone into it in a little bit deeper detail or have seen it where, how are people actually getting insights that will prevent them from actually doing just the same thing as everybody else has done?
Well, I think that is the idea of that this is actually, there's a whole field out there, right? I think there's a lot of times where these decisions are made in reactivity as opposed to saying, actually, there's an expertise out there for us to do. So certainly having your HR teams, whether you have talent teams, diversity teams, all of those people at the table who are really understanding and have their finger on the pulse. Are you inviting them into the conversation, right? Are you making sure that people are tasked with what the business case is? The book certainly has a whole framework for people to walk through to have that conversation, but I think you bring up a really interesting a good point, Jim, around this idea that sometimes these decisions can just be made out of preference. What do I prefer as a leader? We sit around and we talk about that, and we're not having the right conversation. I always say to organizations that I'm working with, I can't get you to do what I want, but I will guarantee you that I can make sure that you're having the right conversation. Answer it for yourself. Here are the series of questions. Here's a framework to walk through so that you're really, because these decisions have consequences to them, right? There is an impact to what we're doing. There's an impact on your people. There's an impact on the business. It deserves a space and an expertise and a level of conversation that goes beyond just personal preference.
Yeah, most definitely. Okay, so how does flexibility contribute to diversity and inclusion efforts?
Yeah, I think it's around the idea of who are we able to provide to everybody to feel valued, and are we building a workplace that goes beyond just one form, right? So if it's how are we supporting caregivers in the workplace? Who needs the kind of flexibility? As I said, we need to degender, deparent, destigmatize it. It should be for everybody. And how are we thinking about all of the different ways that people work, even down to the point where people will say, somebody said, I want everybody in the office because I get I get so engaged when I'm in the office. I'm energized by being in the office. And I said to that one leader, I said, is that true of everybody on your team? Are there people where the office drains them, where they are feeling like we talked about unconscious bias, I'm dealing with micro inequities all day. I don't feel psychologically safe in that environment all of the time. Are we thinking about the people that you're not actually getting your best out of your people? So it's really kind of, I think from a diversity, equity, and inclusion, I can say it can be a driver of it is how are we creating environments where it works for everybody?
What are some real life examples of organizations that have successfully embraced holistic flexibility?
Yeah, so I go into a couple in the book, but there's a law firm, Saul Ewing, that has a 4+4 that they worked through around the kind of flexible work environment that they wanted to create, and that they have maintained, and really kind of working through those the different kinds of flexibility that they offer. So that is certainly one example. And I think it's a good example of kind of working through the framework to come out to what worked best for their culture. And one thing I do want to point out too is that I say you have to be intentional, you have to be inclusive, you do have to be iterative. So are we seeing some shifts in policies right now that some people are announcing, or some organizations might be announcing? I do think we have to be iterative in the process and constantly looking at what's working for us. And are you making the right decision for your culture and for your people and for the business? But it's important to think about, are you actually working through this and coming out and saying, this is what's right for us because we did all of these things, rather than basing those decisions on myths or basing those decisions just on, this seems to be what we want at this time, but not really tied to a business case around it.
So how have you seen some changes in regards to what we now see happening in the Oval Office in regards to DEI rollbacks, DEI adjustments, all of those types of things, and how that, connects with some of the work that you've been doing in regards to, flexibility? What are you seeing happening at the moment?
I think they're two separate conversations is what we're seeing. So there's certainly conversations that people are having around flexibility. I don't know that it's necessarily the return to office mandate for all of the government employees that's causing necessarily an impact on all corporate suddenly saying, right? We're hearing it out in the world. I think it's interesting when we hear in the press certain things that get amplified around what is happening versus others. I would say if you care about your people, you care about flexibility. If you care about your people, you're thinking about diversity, you're thinking about opportunities, who has opportunities, who doesn't have opportunities. You're thinking about, do people feel valued? Do they not feel valued? Are those part of who we are? I think the important thing with organizations right now is I say, take a look at your culture, right? Before we can say, this is what you should be doing, you need to answer who you are first. What does it stand by? Because these are decisions that are really based upon culture and values, and what do your people want, and whether or not the talent landscape matches the political landscape in terms of what is it that your people value. And when I say that, I'm not talking about how many Democrats versus how many Republicans. I'm simply saying, what is it from a perspective of how do your people feel about flexibility? What matters to them, and paying attention to that.
I appreciate you sharing that. Okay, so now it's time for our Hump Day Hoe Down. Okay, Manar, our Hump Day Hoe Down is the part where I ask you a couple questions and you give me rapid answers. And are you ready to hoe down?
I'm ready.
All right.
I hope so.
So you do. You already know the answers. So what is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
Taking more time to pause.
And what is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
What is the best leadership piece I'd ever? Trust your gut.
What do you feel is one of your best tools that helps you lead in business or life?
The ability to take a walk.
What book would you recommend to the Fast Leader Legion? And it could be from any genre.
Carol Dweck's mindset book.
All right, this is my last Hump Day Hoe Down question. Imagine you were given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25, and you can have the knowledge and skills that you have now, and you can take them back with you, but you can't take them all. You can only take just one. So what knowledge or piece of skill would you take back with you, and why?
I think the belief in what's possible without seeing the evidence of it.
Manar Morales, I had a great conversation with you today. How's the Fast Leader Legion get in touch with you?
So you can email me at manar@dfalliance.com, or you can go to our website, which is www.dfalliance.com.
Manar Morales, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and helping us all get over the hump. Execution is an outcome of system architecture, not human willpower. To build alignment with a post-AI operating system, visit executionarchitects.com. And thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show. Please subscribe, comment, share, and keep listening.